We're going to look at a pattern that exists here in the Times Square scene, which is right up here. This little pattern right there. These little ribs. Okay, and you notice that here there's a little place where the little ribs are protruding beyond this sheet here. These little rounded tops and so on. We're going to create this pattern right here. Now keep in mind that in this tutorial I'm going to be doing it the way I did it for Times Square. It's this gray tone. Variations in color or any of the steps that I'm going to show you now will result in a totally different kind of an effect. So keep in mind that it's not what I did, but how I did it that's important. So let's go in here and create this little pattern. So I'm going to create a long rectangle like so. And in a layer, I'm going to go ahead and fill that with a 50% gray. Right there. So it is 50% gray. I'm going to go in there and start adding some tones to it. For one thing, I'm going to give it a layer style of inner glow, which I'll make it a little bigger. And I don't want it to be that tone, so I'm going to go in there and make it a dark black and set the mode to multiply. So there I have this nice dark tone along the edges like that. And maybe we'll increase the opacity a little bit so it gets a little darker, just like that. And I want to add more darkness to this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my burn tool, which I'm going to set up here to shadows. And I got it at 50%. I'm going to make sure that I have no settings that are set up. And I'm going to go and click right up here and then shift click directly below at the bottom and go back and forth until I start getting a much deeper tone on that side. You can see I'm keeping it nice and even, going up and down. I got this nice dark tone happening there. Maybe just a touch on this side. So we have this nice tonality happening there. And maybe I want to just go right down the middle here and create a long vertical shaft right through there like that, which in a separate layer, I'm going to fill that with a white. And I'm going to blur it. I'm going to give it a little Gaussian blur just to soften that up a little bit. And this is going to be a little highlight going right down the center. That's good. I want to make sure it gets clipped inside there so I don't see it. You see what's going on there because of the layer style. All right, and now we want to give the whole thing a little texture. So right here on the main layer, I'm going to go in there and say, let's give it a little texturizer. And we'll just apply a little bit of a texture to it. That looks good. Maybe we'll bring up the relief just a tad and click OK. So now we have this little texture happening. So now I'm going to merge that down. So we have one layer here. And I'm going to turn that into a selection. Now, because of the layer style, I have this darkness going along here, which means that my step and repeat isn't going to quite work the way I want it to because all of a sudden it's going to have this dark edge there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect it. Holding down my Option key, Alt on a PC, I'm going to go in there and deselect this top portion right there. I'm going to come down here to the bottom and deselect this portion right there. So now you can see that what I have left selected is this central portion right there, which is going to be fairly even. So now that I have that, I go in there and say define pattern. That's it. We have now created our pattern. I can take this entire layer right here and just throw it away. I will take the entire layer and throw the thing away because it had a layer style applied to it. So now I'm going to create a new layer. Let's pull back a little bit. And that new layer, I'm going to go ahead and fill it with that pattern we just created. So I'll go in there and there's my pattern. Last thing I just created right there. So I click OK and we see that we have this nice kind of a ribbing effect. Now in the case of the painting, what I did was I went in there and just created little circles that I selected right on top here. Just like so. Right on each edge. And the rest will just kind of pull out like that. I'm going to turn that path into a selection and just delete that portion. And there you can see how I have the little circular areas along the top. Now the wear and tear I applied to this, well, what I did there was to just take a brush, one of the existing brushes like the spatter brush right there. I went in there and modified that brush by giving it a little spacing. Going into shape dynamics where I turn this off, but I got a size jitter set up and I got an angle jitter set up. And let's turn this back to off here. And let's bring this down. So there we have this. And I'm also going to set up a color dynamic so it goes between foreground and background 100%. And I got this black set up and I'm going to pick up a light gray like that. And then in sections, so that they're independent of each other, I went in there and in a separate layer, I started adding that dirt. So I'll go in here and just make a smaller brush, and I just kind of painted some dirt along these edges like so. Just add a little dirt to some of these guys like that, which I can then easily put that into, say, a multiply mode or some other mode, just so it becomes kind of a dirt effect, and bring down the opacity. And there we just see that we start to have little damages in certain areas all over the place like that. And that's all it took to create this pattern and then to weather it down.